My stepsister spread a terrible lie about me to our parents, claiming I was a prostitute. I ended up banning her from my wedding and cutting ties with my family. It all began when I was 17, and I couldn't have imagined that a simple family vacation would flip my world upside down. It sounds exaggerated, but trust me, this isn't just your typical sibling spat. This was the start of my entire relationship with my family unraveling. And it was all thanks to my stepsister Leah, who was 14 at the time. We had never been particularly close. I wouldn't say we hated each other, but we never really clicked, you know? So we're on this family getaway at a beach resort. It's supposed to be one of those fun, relaxing trips, except I'm stuck sharing a room with Leah. I didn't have much of a choice, and I wasn't thrilled, but I figured I'd survive. Boy, was I wrong. Leah had this attitude like she was better than everyone else. Maybe because she was the youngest in the family. Maybe she was just like that naturally. Either way, she was always treated like the perfect little angel by my dad and stepmom. Meanwhile, there I was. Neither the black sheep nor the golden child. Just overlooked. They didn't hate me, but they didn't seem to care either. You know what I mean. Anyway, after a few days of trying to be civil, Leah and I had a big argument. I can't even remember how it started. Probably something dumb like me borrowing her hairbrush without asking or her hogging the bathroom. But it blew up quickly. Before I knew it, we were screaming at each other, and she hurled a pillow at me like a toddler throwing a tantrum. After that, she completely shut down and gave me the silent treatment for the rest of the trip. Leah didn't say a word to me, not good morning or pass the sunscreen, nothing. It was like I didn't exist. Honestly, I was fine with that. I thought, great, I don't have to deal with her. But the silence didn't stop when we got back home. She kept ignoring me, pretending I was invisible. At first, it was just weird. I assumed she'd get over it eventually. I mean, she's 14, right? She can't stay mad forever. Wrong again. Things took a sinister turn when she started spreading lies about me. I didn't know it at the time, but Leah was telling our stepmom and my dad that I was, get this, a drug addict and a prostitute. Yep, you read that right. She claimed I was selling myself for money and was hooked on drugs. And the worst part? They believed her. I found out months later, but by then, the damage was done. Leah had painted me as a complete disaster, and my dad and stepmom started treating me differently. They wouldn't say it outright, but their behavior gave it away. They became distant, cold, and judgmental. Dad could barely look at me, and my stepmom started hovering whenever I left the house, like she was waiting to catch me doing something wrong. At first, I didn't get why they were acting so weird. I hadn't done anything. Yeah, I'd smoked a joint or two at some parties, but I wasn't a druggy. And sure, I'd been on a few dates, but nothing remotely close to what Leah accused me of. But no matter how much I tried to show them I was just a normal teenager, they saw me as some rebellious screw-up. Everything came crashing down one night when my dad stormed into my room. I was just sitting there minding my own business when he burst in, ranting about how I was tearing the family apart and needed to get my life together. I was clueless, so I asked him what he meant, and that's when he dropped the bombshell. He told me Leah had caught me sneaking out at night, meeting random guys and using drugs. My first instinct was to laugh because it sounded so ridiculous. Was he serious? But he wasn't joking. And the more furious he got, the more I realized this wasn't some misunderstanding. He truly believed her. I tried to defend myself, to tell him Leah was lying, but he wouldn't listen. He accused me of disrespecting the family and warned that if I didn't shape up, I'd be kicked out. That's when it hit me. Nothing I said mattered. He was never going to believe me. Leah had poisoned their minds against me, and there was no way to fix it. It only got worse from there. My stepmom started treating me like a criminal. She'd go through my stuff when I wasn't home, looking for drugs or proof of whatever nonsense Leah told her. I felt like I was under constant surveillance, and it made me anxious. Every time I walked in the door, I wondered if today would be the day they finally kicked me out. Meanwhile, Leah acted like she hadn't done anything. She still ignored me, but every now and then, I'd catch her smirking, like she was proud of what she'd done. I could not believe it. I didn't understand why she was doing this to me. But I knew one thing, I couldn't trust her. It wasn't long before I began to spiral. How could I not? My whole family believed I was a degenerate and I had no one on my side. I began to isolate myself, staying in my room as much as possible and avoiding my father and stepmother. I didn't have many friends at the time, so there wasn't anybody I could talk to about what was going on. I felt very alone. Looking back, I should have left sooner. I should have packed my stuff and left. But I was afraid. I had nowhere to go, and I was still in school, attempting to finish my last year. So, I remained. I hoped that somehow things would improve. However, they didn't. Things just got worse. Okay. So, when Leah began the story about me being a prostitute and a drug addict, everything went downhill. As if it wasn't enough that my parents had virtually abandoned me. They completely believed her without questioning it. My father, who I expected to at least ask me what was going on, didn't even attempt. He basically started lecturing me every moment he had, telling me how I was going to ruin my life and how I was a failure. I tried everything. I tried to sit them down and explain that Leah was lying, that none of this was correct. But they wouldn't listen to anything I said. My stepmother even questioned why Leah would lie. What does she stand to gain from this? And at that time, I had no response. I wasn't sure why Leah was doing this. I knew she was damaging my life for reasons I couldn't understand. What's the craziest part? Leah couldn't stop grinning at me whenever she walked past. It seemed as if she relished seeing me struggle. She knew she had my parents wrapped around her finger, so she utilized it. I'm not sure how or when it started, but she understood just how to influence them. And the more I attempted to defend myself, the more they insisted that I was the problem. It came to the point when I simply stopped talking. So, what was the point? They were not going to trust me, so why even try to explain myself? When I got home from school, I would head directly to my room and attempt to remain out of their way. I started feeling odd in my own home, and I wasn't sure whether I wanted to stay there anymore. But at 17, where was I expected to go? I didn't have any friends to crash with, and I didn't have any money saved up because my dad would deduct a portion of my part-time work income for living expenses. Then came the breaking point. One night, I arrived home later than normal since I had stayed late at school to complete an assignment. As soon as I went through the door, my dad was waiting for me, looking like he was about to burst. He yelled, "Where are you?" before I could say anything. "What the heck are you doing sneaking about like that?" I was utterly perplexed. I explained that I was working on a school assignment, but he did not believe me. He went on a rant about how he knew I was lying and that Leah had informed him she saw me slipping away with another guy earlier. That was when I lost it. I mean, how many more lies would she tell? How much more harm could she cause before they realized what was going on? I shouted back, telling him that Leah was a liar and was making things up just to tease me. But my father wouldn't have it. He came right up in my face, and for the first time I was afraid he'd hit me. His hands were clenched, and he was quivering with wrath as if he was about to lose control. I can't remember what I said next, but whatever it was, it sent him over the brink. He lifted his hand as if he was ready to strike me, but instead slammed it on the kitchen counter so hard that I thought he damaged something. Get out of my home. He spoke in such a quiet and calm tone that it was frightening. Then when he yelled, "I can't even look at you now. You are a shame." I stood there for a second, trying to understand what had just occurred. Was he really kicking me out for a bunch of lies? I dashed upstairs, grabbed a few items, and left without saying anything to Leah. I could not look at her. I couldn't satisfy her. All I could think about was how this 14-year-old child had utterly flipped my life upside down, and there was nothing I could do about it. I ended up staying at a friend's apartment for a few days. They didn't know the whole story, but they knew enough to let me stay for a while until I worked it out. My father didn't call. My stepmother didn't call. And Leah absolutely did not call. It was as if they had eliminated me from their lives overnight. With the little money I had, I ultimately found a horrible flat. And for a long, I didn't even consider my family. I was only trying to survive. It wasn't easy, but at least I got out of that house. I didn't have to deal with their allegations anymore. For a few months, I wasn't bothered by Leah grinning at me as if she had won some kind of sick game. Things were silent. I did not hear from my parents at all. To be honest, I hoped that after a while, they'd realize they'd made a mistake, that Leah was lying, and would apologize. But nothing. But then, out of nowhere, I get a message from Leah's former lover. I hadn't thought about Leah for a long time. I mean, why should I? She was no longer in my life, and I was really happy because of it. So when this guy messaged me, I didn't know what to expect. But what he told me altered everything. Apparently, Leah had been really intoxicated one night. And in the midst of an argument with her partner, she just spilled everything. She acknowledged that she had lied about me many years ago. Not simply small falsehoods either. She admitted to fabricating the entire tale about my being a prostitute and a drug addict out of jealousy. And get this. She was jealous because she believed I was receiving too much attention from males. I sat there gazing at my phone, trying to understand what I'd just read. My mind was racing all the time. All those years of my life were destroyed. My relatives treated me like trash, all because Leah was envious of some adolescent nonsense. I wasn't sure how to feel. Part of me wanted to laugh because it was so silly, but largely I was upset, like very mad. I remembered all the times I'd attempted to protect myself, all the times I begged my father and stepmother to believe me. All those evenings I grieved in my chamber, feeling as if my entire family had turned against me for something I hadn't done. And for what? Because Leah couldn't take the attention I was getting. It was unbelievable. So now I have this confession, correct? I had proof that Leah had lied the entire time. Her ex-boyfriend even promised to back me up if I confronted her or told my parents. But I really didn't know what to do. A part of me wanted to rush to my father's house and throw it at them. I told you I wasn't lying. But another part of me was simply exhausted. I'm tired of the whole scenario. I'm tired of trying to convince them to see the reality. They obviously didn't care enough to figure it out on their own. I considered it for several days before deciding what to do. In the end, I did not confront Leah. I did not inform my parents. I did not accomplish anything. What would change? Sure, I could show them the proof, and perhaps they would apologize. But would that truly compensate for what they had put me through? Will it bring back the years I've lost? The response was no, so I let it go. I banned Leah's ex-boyfriend's phone number, erased the message, and went on. Or at least I tried. The reality is that even though I did nothing with the confession, it has weighed heavily on me. It seemed like a massive piece of unfinished business that I couldn't simply ignore. Every time I thought I'd finished it, something reminded me of my family. And the rage would resurface. It quotes difficult to describe. But there was a part of me that still desired justice, even though I knew I wouldn't receive it. Around that time, I had begun to establish a new life. I had a solid career in an apartment that wasn't ideal but was mine, and I had met somebody. Kyle was everything I needed. He was friendly and supportive. Most significantly, he did not arrive with any of the baggage that my family had. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had something positive going in my life. Kyle was aware of my familial predicament. I didn't tell him everything, but he understood why I wasn't close to them. He did not press me to talk about it, which I liked. He understood that I was attempting to move on, and he was just delighted to be a part of it. We'd been dating for nearly a year when the Leah confession happened, and Kyle was my rock throughout it all. Despite his encouragement, I couldn't avoid the notion that something remained unanswered. My folks hadn't contacted me since I left. Not once. No calls or messages, nothing. And despite my best efforts to appear otherwise, I did care. I hated how much I cared, but I couldn't stop myself. They were my family. Even though they had injured me, I desired some sort of resolution. I just wasn't sure how to acquire it. Then my father unexpectedly phones me. I didn't recognize the number at first because I hadn't heard from him in a long time. When I responded, there was an awkward quiet on the other end, as if he wasn't sure what to say. Finally, he cleared his throat and stated, "We need to talk." If this had been a few years ago, I would have delighted at the opportunity to have this talk. I quote, have been prepared to spell everything out and demand an apology. But now I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear what he had to say. Still, curiosity got the best of me, and I agreed to meet him for coffee. It was as if we were meeting for the first time. My father looked older and more exhausted than I recalled. And there was this odd tension between us that made the entire affair extra stranger. We made small chat for a while, nothing significant, just catching up. He eventually came to the point. He informed me Leah confessed to him. She had told him everything, even the lies and envy, and all of the rage I'd been holding in came pouring back. He apologized. He stated that he could not believe he had been so blind. He regretted everything. He said he wishes he had listened to me, but here's the deal. I didn't feel any better hearing it. An apology would not be enough to undo his actions. It was not going to compensate for the fact that he had abandoned me when I needed him the most. As much as he tried to fix things, I knew it was too late. I told him I appreciated his apologies, but I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive him. And you know what? He didn't even fight me about it. He only nodded, as if he realized he had lost me. And we sat there silently for a time. We finally said farewell, and it seemed definitive. We both knew this would be our last conversation, and that was all. There was no major conflict. There is no spectacular reunion, just a peaceful goodbye. So, after a few years, things are finally going nicely for me. I've moved on from the family turmoil, or at least I thought I did. I am engaged to Kyle, and we are planning our wedding. Everything should be flawless, correct? Of course, dealing with family members is never simple. I decided quite early on that I was not going to invite Leah to the wedding. I mean, after everything she has put me through, why should I? I didn't want that type of negativity surrounding me on such a special day. Kyle agreed, and it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, knowing that I no longer had to put up with Leah's manipulating behavior. So we're mailing out invitations and making preparations. Everything is going nicely. I also invited my father and stepmother because, despite the anguish of the past, a part of me wanted them there. They had apologized, and I suppose a little part of me was still holding out hope that we might be a family again. However, nothing ever goes wrong with my family, according to plan. My father made the first call. I remember gazing at the computer, seeing his name appear, and feeling a strange combination of exhilaration and anxiety. I believed he was calling to discuss the wedding. Perhaps he wants to assist. I do not know. I think I was still holding out hope for a regular relationship. Boy, was I mistaken. "Hey," he murmured, his voice strangely tense, as if he was trying too hard to keep it casual. "We need to discuss the wedding." I instantly had a terrible feeling in my stomach. I could sense something was wrong, but I tried to keep it calm. "Yeah, what up?" There was a long gap on the other end of the line, during which I could hear him take a deep breath. That's when I realized what was coming next was not going to be good. "Leah has been inquiring why she did not receive an invitation," he remarked. I literally felt my entire body tense up. Of course, it was about Leah. It was always about Leah. "She is not invited," I said, attempting to keep my voice calm. "I am not having her at my wedding, Dad." That's when he struck me with it. If Leah isn't invited, I can't come either. I only sat there for a second, stunned. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. My father was giving me an ultimatum. "Invite the sister who ruined my life, or he won't come." I couldn't find any words at first. I mean, was that fair? I understand that he did not want to pick between his children, but Leah was not just any sibling with whom I had a little disagreement. She completely damaged my connection with my family, and he expected me to forgive her and invite her to my wedding. No way. "Are you serious now?" I eventually managed to say. I could feel my voice trembling, not from grief, but from sheer rage. "You have to understand," he added, sounding far too composed for someone who had just made a major demand on his daughter. "Leah is truly apologetic. She has been attempting to make things right. That was when I lost it. Attempting to put things right. Are you kidding me? She wrecked my life, Father. She falsely accused me of being a prostitute and a drug addict. And you believed her. And now you're telling I need to invite her to my wedding? As if none of that ever occurred." He attempted to calm me down by talking about how families should keep together and how Leah had changed. But I didn't hear any of it. I was so enraged I couldn't see straight. It wasn't all about Leah at this time. It was about my father once again preferring her over me. It seemed as if no matter what she did, she was still the golden kid, while I was the one who had to make all the sacrifices. I finally told him that if he couldn't attend my wedding without her, he shouldn't come at all. I hung up the phone before you could say anything further. I was shivering and fighting to hold back tears because no matter how upset I was, it hurt. I had truly hoped that after all this time, we might have a good relationship. But here we are again, me on the outside, with Leah receiving all of the attention. It seemed like nothing had changed. When I informed Kyle what had happened, he was outraged. He stated he couldn't believe my father would place me in that situation, and that I didn't tell Olia anything. You deserve more than this, he continued saying. And honestly, he was correct. I deserved better. I didn't deserve to have my wedding transformed into a family drama because my father couldn't bear the thought of picking sides. Over the following several days, I received a slew of texts from my stepmother, all stating the same thing. Please rethink. Leah is family. She apologized, blah, blah, blah. I disregarded each one. I was not backing down. This was my wedding, and I was not going to let Leah destroy it, just as she damaged everything else. But a few weeks later, my father showed up at my flat. I was not expecting him, and as I opened the door, I nearly slammed it back in his face. But he seemed so exhausted, as if he hadn't slept in days. A part of me wanted to hear what he had to say. I am not here to fight, he said as soon as I opened the door. I just want to chat. I allowed him in, and we sat for a minute. Neither of us said anything. The quiet was so thick it could be sliced with a knife. Finally, he spoke. I know I've made errors, he said, gazing down at his hands as if he couldn't face me. But I'm trying to make things right. I do not want to lose you. I did not say anything. I was too angry to trust myself and speak. I know Leah wounded you. He moved on. I understand, and I'm not asking you to forgive her, but she is still my daughter. I can't just cut her out. I felt like yelling. Why was it always about Leah? Why didn't he see I was the one who had been hurt? That I was the person who earned his support? I am not asking you to cut her out, Dad, I eventually replied. I'm simply asking you to select me once. I quote, V spent my entire life second to her, and if you can't show up for me on the most important day of my life without dragging her along, you might not deserve to be there. He said nothing after that. He simply nodded, got up, and departed. And that was all. He didn't attend my wedding. Neither did my stepmother. Leah, of course, was not invited. And, truthfully, it stung. It ached a lot. However, it seemed like the first time in my life that I had actually stood up for myself. The wedding day came and went, and I'll tell you, it was the happiest day of my life. Even without my father and stepmother around, I didn't expect to feel this way. I feared that not having them would cast a pall over the entire situation. But when I went down the aisle with Kyle's brother, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, I knew something. I didn't need them. I had spent so long trying to persuade my father to select me, to recognize my merits. But at that moment, I realized I was better off without his conditional affection. Kyle looked incredible. When I saw him standing at the altar, all of my tension and resentment slipped away. I was not thinking about Leah, my father, or any of the turmoil that had consumed me for so long. I was simply thinking about my future and how relieved I was to be rid of all the baggage that came with my family following the wedding. Things were calm for a time. I did not hear from my father, and I honestly did not expect to. He made his decision when he saw Leah's sentiments were more important than mine, and I wasn't about to pursue him. I had Kyle, his family, and our friends. They were more like family to me than my own ever was. But of course, nothing stays calm for long in my family. A month after the wedding, I received a note from my stepmother. It was a long, meandering message about how much they missed me and wanted to work things out. She went on to say that Leah was sorry and that I should just let it go. For the good of the family. I almost laughed when I read that. Despite all that had transpired, they still did not comprehend it. They continued to believe that this could be easily ignored. Years of falsehoods and manipulation seemed insignificant, like I should simply forgive Leah since she apologized. But here's the deal. She never even apologized to me. She never did reach out, never apologized. She never recognized the sorrow she had inflicted, and they still expected me to simply move on. Initially, I ignored the notice. I did not want to deal with it. I figured if I didn't answer, they'd get the idea and leave me alone. But a week later, I received another one, this time from my father. It was brief and to the point. We miss you. Let us chat. A part of me wanted to shout. Why was I always the one who needed to mend things? Why was it up to me to reach out and make peace when they were the ones who injured me? I had given them several chances, and every time they failed to meet my expectations, I was tired of being the one to set things right. I did not want to chat. I didn't want to go back to pretending everything was normal when it wasn't. So I decided to chop them entirely off. I banned their phone numbers, removed them from social media, and promised myself that this was it. No more reaching out, no more second chances. It was difficult at first because I still had hope that they would change. Perhaps my father would finally see that I deserved better. But the more I thought about it, the more I knew it was unlikely to happen. He was never going to select me. He made it obvious when he gave me the ultimatum regarding Leah. Kyle was really supportive throughout the entire process. He repeatedly assured me that I was making the correct decision, that I owed them nothing, and that I deserved to be happy without their destructive influence in my life. And he was correct. For the first time in a long time, I felt in charge of my own happiness. I wasn't waiting for my father's approval or Leah's bogus apologies. I was living for myself, and it felt liberating. But of course, it did not end there. My father discovered I had banned him, which triggered the emails. Long, passionate emails about how I was driving the family apart and how my reluctance to forgive Leah broke his heart. He went on to say how family is meant to remain together no matter what, and how I was being unjust to Leah by not giving her the opportunity to make things right. I almost did not react. I just wanted to delete the email and be over with it. But something within me cracked. I was weary of being the villain in their narrative, tired of being the one who had to forgive and forget, while others could move on as if nothing had occurred. So I wrote back. I told my father everything I had been keeping back for years. I told him how heartbroken I was that he never believed me, and how abandoned I felt because he chose Leah's lies above mine. How he allowed me to suffer for something I did not do. I informed him that Leah had wrecked my life, and no amount of apologies would change that. I informed him that I no longer wanted to be a member of their family, since plainly I never was. They had picked Leah, which was excellent, but I was not going to keep lying that I could simply get over it and go on. It felt nice to let it all out, even though I knew it wouldn't alter anything. My father did not respond to the email, and I honestly did not expect him to. He'd made his decision long ago, and I'd finally made mine. Cutting them off was one of the most difficult things I've ever done, but it was also one of the smartest decisions I ever did. For the first time in my life, I wasn't under the influence of Leah's falsehoods. I wasn't pursuing my father's approval or attempting to repair a family that had never truly supported me. I was free. Kyle and I are doing well now. We are starting to think about the future, maybe even have children one day. And I know that whatever happens, I will not let my past define me. I finally have a true family that loves and supports me. This is more than enough. So cutting them off wasn't simple, but it was worthwhile. Sometimes you have to let go of those who have wounded you, even if they are relatives. Because at the end of the day, your contribution is more significant than their expectations. Honestly, I've never been happy. So, approximately a year after breaking off my family, I believed I was done with them. I actually did. Life was good, great. I too had Kyle. We were discussing having a house together, and for once I wasn't waking up every day worried about family problems. It seemed as if I'd finally reached the point where I could simply be joyful. But suddenly, out of nowhere, I received unexpected news. One day I was perusing around social media, minding my own business, when I received a message from an old mutual acquaintance of Leah's. We hadn't spoken in ages, so I wasn't sure why they were reaching out. At first I assumed they were merely checking in, but nope. The message was concise and to the point. Hey, have you heard of Leah? Now let me tell you, that is not a message to disregard, no matter how much you wish to keep out of family business. So even though every part of me was screaming, "Don't get involved," I said no. What happened? The following message struck me like a rock. She S in rehabilitation. She became addicted to narcotics and attempted suicide. I recall gazing at my phone trying to understand what I'd just read. Leah, rehab, suicide attempt. It did not make sense. Leah had always been the golden kid, the one who couldn't do anything wrong, the person in whom everyone believed. She was the one who wrecked my life by her falsehoods. And now this. Apparently, when I severed relations with my family, things had begun to fall apart for Leah. She got involved with the wrong crowd, began experimenting with drugs, and things quickly worsened, based on what I was informed. It wasn't simply a light party. It was serious drugs, heroin, and everything she could get her hands on. It grew so awful that she attempted suicide. Her parents, my father and stepmother, had discovered her barely in time. They took her to the hospital, and once she had recovered physically, they admitted her to a rehabilitation center. They were keeping it quiet to protect her reputation, but news spread. Small towns, rumor spreads quickly. I sat there going through the letters, experiencing a strange mixture of feelings. On the one hand, I felt badly. I would not want that on anybody. I didn't want Leah to die, and learning that she attempted suicide was a relief. I found it difficult to comprehend. But on the other hand, a part of me couldn't stop thinking about karma. I realize it sounds harsh, but after everything Leah had put me through, after she shattered my connection with my family and lied about me for years, it was difficult not to feel like this was some kind of cosmic retribution. I mean, she had flipped my life upside down, and now her idyllic little world had collapsed. It felt as if the cosmos was leveling things out. I did not contact my relatives after receiving the news. I was not about to get back into that quagmire. No matter how horrible things had become for Leah, they choose to accept her lies and treat me like trash. I had no intention of reopening that door just because things had gone wrong for them. Several days later, I received another communication from the same mutual buddy. They informed me that my father and stepmother were suffering with Leah's rehabilitation and wanted to reach out to me. They hoped that I might help in some way and be there for the family at this difficult time. I couldn't believe the audacity. After everything they did, they chose Leah above me, believed her lies, and left me out. They wanted me to come back and play happy family since Leah had reached rock bottom. No way. I sat there for a long time, gazing at the message, trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to answer by telling them precisely where they might direct their need for assistance. But another part of me stopped caring. I did not need their approval. I didn't need to shout or become furious. I'd moved on, and I wasn't going to let them drag me back into the pandemonium. So I did not react. I blocked the common buddy and continued living my life. Story 2. My parents forced me out of high school due to a horrible rumor that was never true. But years later, they see me on television and phone to make their demands. Growing up, it was clear that my twin brother and I were on quite different paths, at least according to my parents. Their incessant comparisons began when we were old enough to walk and talk. He was always the golden child, destined for tremendous success, while I was labeled as the black sheep from the start. Honestly, I preferred shooting hoops or scouring the neighborhood for new pals to sitting inside and studying all day. Every year, our birthdays underlined the huge contrast in how we were treated. This was going to be our day. Yes, it was our day since we shared it, but it was always about him rather than us as a group. By the time we turned 7, the pattern was evident. He would throw these blowout parties with all the bells and whistles, magic shows, bounce castles, with his buddies running riot through our lawn and house, driven by sugar and the wild energy that only second graders had. Then there's me. My side of the celebration. If you could call it that, it consisted of a little cake, generally a store-bought one, with my name quickly piped on an icing that was slightly different in color from my brother's. I could invite folks over, but it wasn't the same. No sleepovers, no special outings. Just a few hours in the backyard, sometimes eclipsed by the noisier, more exciting portion of the celebration taking place concurrently. This didn't simply apply to birthdays. It impacted every part of our existence. When he returned home with a prize from an academic competition, the house erupted in applause. My sports trophies were welcomed with a grin and a short, "That's nice," before they returned to discussing his successes. The partiality was obvious, and it only became worse as we grew older. I recall one very blatant occasion in which we both ended up in the school spelling bee. I got eliminated in the second round. Nobody is perfect, right? But he made it to the final rounds, finally finishing third. Our parents talked about him as if he had won the Nobel Prize. They threw him a little celebratory supper and invited relatives to brag about his academic abilities. Me? I received a pat on the back and good luck next time. And it's not as if I didn't attempt to get their consent. I performed well in school, not always at the top of my class, but I held my own. I played sports, had excellent friends, and remained out of trouble. but it never seemed to be enough. Regardless of what I accomplished, I felt invisible unless I was explicitly compared to my brother, which always underlined my flaws. One memory that stands out is from our 9th birthday. While preparing the celebration, I overheard my mother on the phone with a friend, laughing as she recounted how they were holding a large party for him, but only a modest gathering for me, since that's all she really needed. Realizing how deeply entrenched their beliefs were hit me like a blow in the belly. The day of the celebration went as planned. His portion of the gathering was a show. There was a clown, a magician, and a little petting zoo. His friends' laughter and yells of delight resonated throughout our home, serving as a daily reminder of our differences. My celebration was restricted to a corner of the living room, a few balloons tied to my chair, and a small gathering of my best friends who appeared to be just as uncomfortable with the scenario as I was. As time progressed, this evident partiality began to seem more like emotional abuse. They weren't merely unconcerned with my achievements or hobbies. They aggressively put them down. I like sports and always had a talent for them, but my parents considered them as a distraction. They would mock my practices and games, arguing that they were a waste of time that might have been better spent studying like my brother. I recall one evening returning home ecstatic after winning a regional basketball competition. I hurried in, trophy in hand, ready to break the news, hoping they'd notice me just once. The chilly reaction I received was heartbreaking. My father barely looked up from his newspaper, while my mother murmured a half-hearted congrats before immediately returning the subject to my brother's impending science fair. They criticized not just what I did, but also who I was. They would make casual remarks about my acquaintances, my fashion choices, and even the music I listened to. Nothing was off limits. It was like living under a microscope, except that every observation was twisted to highlight my defects while extolling my brother's merits. My grandma was the only person who appeared to see me for who I was. She was my saving grace. During those troubled years, she paid her visits. It seemed like a breath of fresh air in the stuffy environment of my home life. She'd send me my favorite chocolates and smuggle me a few dollars, instructing me to spend it on something enjoyable just for you. Her visits were a joy of my upbringing, when I felt cherished and truly loved. But when we approached our adolescence, even my grandmother's visits couldn't protect me from the growing antagonism at home. It was evident that I was just the other child, living in the shadow of a brother who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. Reflecting on those days today, it's almost odd to consider how different our lives were when living together. We were twins born just minutes apart, yet our parents thought we were from other worlds. It's unusual to feel like an outsider in your own home, a visitor at your own celebration, but that was my reality, and I lived it every day until I was given the opportunity to escape and find my place in the world, away from the shadows and harsh comparisons. It was my sophomore year of high school, and almost everyone was using social media. Snapchat seems to have become the new method to remain in touch with pals, share portions of your day, and simply stay connected. Everyone was on it, everyone, including me, although surreptitiously. My parents had a laundry list of regulations about what I could and couldn't do, and using social media was strictly prohibited. In their book, this regulation felt very restrictive. It was more than simply not having access to social media. It was also being cut off from my classmates. I had to sneak around to download Snapchat after school hours, whereas my brother easily surfs the web, chats with pals, and even plays online games. The one program I believed would be my small gateway to freedom. Everything went crazy on Tuesday because of this software. It was just a typical school day. Nothing out of the usual. I attended lessons, talked with friends, and practiced track after school. Little did I realize that my covert usage of Snapchat was about to flip my already difficult home life upside down. I went home that evening, phone tucked safely in my pocket, intending to skim through several texts before getting started on schoolwork. My brother was sitting in the living room as usual, hooked to his laptop. My parents were still at work, which usually provided me some breathing room. I went to my room, put my backpack on the bed, and took out my phone to catch up on what I had missed. That's when my mother arrived home early. Not a little early. Very early. I didn't notice her automobile approaching since I was listening to music. My door suddenly swung open, and there she was, looking at me while holding my phone. When she watched me freeze, her look quickly changed from surprise to rage. Guilty as accused. With Snapchat open in front of me. What quote is that? She snapped, her voice breaking over the music. I attempted to explain to her that it was only Snapchat, but it wasn't a huge issue. But for her, it was a big thing, a clear breach of their trust and norms. My words fell on deaf ears. She took my phone and started browsing through my texts and photos. Her rage increased with each stroke. "This is just what we warned you about." She snarled and glared at me as if I had committed a horrible crime. "You cannot be trusted. You simply can't." My father had also returned home before I realized it. He was less explosive but more dissatisfied, which made things worse. They stood in my room, my mother talking about how social media was corrupting me and how I was sacrificing my future for a foolish app. My father nodded along, adding his own serious concerns about privacy and how I was exposing myself to hazards online. The entire scenario soon escalated. My mother, still enraged, began throwing my room. She flung my books off the desk, took posters from the wall, and emptied my drawers. My little refuge, my small slice of personal space, was being destroyed right in front of my eyes. My concerns were drowned out by her ongoing diatribe about trust and regulations. Then came the real kicker. They determined that because I had so flagrantly violated their trust, I did not deserve privacy. With a gloomy expression, my father lifted the door from its hinges. Right then there, "Privacy is a privilege," he stated, the door slamming to the floor with a thud that echoed my sinking heart. "If you have nothing to conceal, doors are unnecessary," my mother added, as if this made any sense at all. We were left without a door. My room is exposed. I felt more exposed and violated than I had with any Snapchat message. My area was no longer mine. It was just another part of the home available to their observation. My brother, intrigued by the noise, had strolled in at this point. Instead of siding with me or even remaining neutral, he saw an opportunity with our parents, knowing I was the problem child. He put his own spin to the story, stating he had seen me conversing to lads online, making it appear ominous and mysterious. "That is not true," I fired back, but the harm had been done. His remarks just stoked the fire. In the end, my phone was seized indefinitely. My room was in disorder, and my brother exited the scene with a smug expression that told me he believed he had solidified his position as the golden kid even more. That night, I lay in my bed, looking at the open doorway filled with rage, helplessness, and betrayal. My own twin had put me under the bus to maintain himself in good standing, while my parents had violated my privacy and dignity with an app. My pals utilized this software every day without thinking twice. As I lay there, it became brutally obvious that the rules were different for me. This has always been the case. My brother had privileges I could only dream of, while I was penalized for little transgressions. It wasn't just about Snapchat and privacy, it was about control, and I was losing the struggle for independence in my own house. That night was a turning point for me. Lying in the dark, the opening where my door used to be, a sobering reminder of my lack of agency. I told myself that one day, I'd establish a life for myself outside of these walls, a life in which I could create my own rules, live without continual supervision, and I'll never have to defend my need for some solitude. Our parents' wrongful acts produced a poisonous environment, allowing him to take advantage of the situation. He developed a habit of lying about me, falsely accusing me of things I never done so he could get away with everything. If he steals something, he easily shifts the blame onto me and my parents, who are already inclined to assume the worst about me. I readily accepted his falsehoods. He would insult me in front of my schoolmates and mock my attractiveness. Despite this, I had a large network of friends at school because I was personable and willing to connect. My twin, on the other hand, struggled with interpersonal abilities and began to hate the fact that I could talk to people while he, as an introvert, felt embarrassed. This jealousy boiled out during our 14th birthday celebration, when hardly one came up to celebrate his birthday. I'm not sure why his buddies did it to him, but in contrast, my friends brought me out for ice cream, and I had a fantastic day. This enraged my brother enough to seek vengeance. My brother began spreading false accusations about me at school, describing me as a spoilt brat. He would lie to everyone that I was physically assaulting him at home since our parents loved him more. Unbeknownst to me, he went to unsettling lengths to create proof. He would purposely punch himself, causing injuries such as a black eye or bruise to appear. The next day, he would boldly stroll into school, exhibiting the self-inflicted bruises as proof of my alleged assault and fabricating stories. When our parents questioned him about the injuries, he would lie, claiming that they were the result of benign activities such as playing football with friends. Lies and his supposed black eyes gained hold, and many began to accept his skewed account of events. It didn't take long for murmurs to spread, and my friends began to look at me suspiciously. At first, I noticed tiny differences. Friends who used to converse with me in the corridor suddenly grew aloof. Invitations to group hangouts were increasingly rare. It was as if a switch had been flicked, and people were unwilling to connect with the alleged spoilt girl charged with assault. One day, I mustered the confidence to ask my former closest buddy why things had changed between us. She said that my twin brother had been circulating falsehoods about me. She exposed the precise falsehoods he had told everyone, accusing me of things I never did. I was stunned to hear her remarks. The emotion was a combination of incredulity and betrayal, as if the earth under me had given way. My brother, whom I grew up with, was spreading falsehoods about me, accusing me of things I would never even consider committing. It was a betrayal that struck deep, leaving me with a knot in my stomach and a sorrowful heart. I addressed my brother that day after school, but he decided to ignore me. I begged him to stop lying about me, but he only grinned and said I deserved to be alone. I was at a loss for words since his lies and actions began to frighten me. I wanted to talk to my parents, but I was frightened they would believe my brother instead of me. Isolation ached, especially because I had always been eager to make friends. It felt as if my brother's jealousy was fueling falsehoods or ripping down the bonds I had formed over time. Teach us how to get wind of the rumors. It was a weird sensation, as if I were living in a parallel realm where my genuine self was obscured by the nasty falsehoods spoken by my own twin. The falsehoods had outgrown me. They, as adolescent gossip, were now impacting how people regarded me. The unpleasant gossip swiftly reached my principal's ears, and my greatest dread came true. The principal summoned me, my brother, and our parents to his room to discuss the purported allegations. I sat there, pulse racing, as the principal demanded the truth. I hoped my brother would finally come clean, but he doubled down on his falsehoods. He informed the principal that the stories were real and depicted me as a bully who beat him up when his parents weren't around. I could not believe it. Shock rushed over me as my brother continued to tell this twisted narrative about how I was furious at him for receiving more attention from our parents. He held to his tale like glue, despite the fact that it was all falsehoods. My mother burst into tears after hearing my brother's story, clutching him like he was a hero. My father attempted to console my brother, telling him that it was brave of him to speak up and that he would not guarantee that nothing would happen to him after that day. I attempted to defend myself, arguing with the principal that everything was made up. I felt as if I was drowning in a sea of accusations, desperately attempting to get to the top. But my brother persisted, arguing that I was an angry, aggressive guy. I take out my anger on him every day. My mother's tears flowed as she grabbed onto my brother and gave me accusatory stares. It was like facing a wall of believing in my brother's fabricated narrative. My principal sharply chastised me, stating that the school does not accept bullying and that these were grounds for suspension. I begged him not to suspend me, but he shook his head, saying he couldn't simply let it go. I implored him. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I tried to assure him that I hadn't done anything to my brother. The principal forcefully informed me that I would be suspended for 10 days so that others would not intimidate anybody. It hit me hard, and I began weeping even harder, imploring him to reconsider. My parents, outraged and humiliated by the incident, hauled me out of the principal's office. I did not want to go. I wanted to present my case and make them understand, but they were not having any of it. We left school. My heart is heavy with frustration and humiliation. When we came home, things changed drastically. My father abruptly began packing my belongings. I was stunned, perplexed, and had no idea what was going on. My mother asked him what he was doing, but he just yelled that he couldn't allow me live in the same house as my brother anymore. I was weeping on my knees, asking with my brother to tell them the truth. But he remained cool, untouched by my emotions. My father kept packing my belongings before throwing the bag into our entryway. I clutched to my father's legs, asking him not to kick me away. It felt as if a nightmare were happening. He informed me that a bully like me did not deserve to be in his house, and that he would call his mother, my grandma, to come fetch me up if she wanted to. It seemed as if the world had collapsed underneath me. I stood there in disbelief, surrounded by my stuff, which were scattered across the foyer, having been booted out of my own house. Eventually, my grandma showed up. She grabbed all of my belongings and assisted me in loading them into the car, then seated me in the passenger seat. Before stepping up to my parents' front door, she checked sure I was wearing my seatbelt. She rang the doorbell, and when my father opened it, she began to rant at him for treating me in this manner with firm resolve. She informed him that if he approached or attempted to contact me again, she would not hesitate to engage the police or the CPS, since what he had done to a youngster like me might land him in jail. My mother attempted to shift blame by telling her that it was my fault. However, my grandma was having none of it. She stayed firm in her defense of me, emphasizing that I was only a child and did not deserve to be treated so cruelly. That was the first time I realized how strong my grandma was. She did not tremble in front of my parents, and contrary to popular belief, she trusted me. We eventually drove away, leaving behind my childhood home. I can't even begin to describe how excruciatingly painful I felt at the moment. I recall weeping on the bed and refusing to eat anything, despite my grandmother's insistence. When I informed her what my brother had done, she was astonished as well. She told me that she trusted my version of the story, and I was relieved that I had at least one person on my side. When the 10-day suspension ended, returning to school was like going back into the lion's den. As I approached the familiar corridors, my classmates' expressions told volumes. Judgment, whispers, sidelong looks. The weight of the bogus charges continues to hang in the air. Meanwhile, my brother shamelessly disregarded me and like I didn't exist. He had made friends with a few people who believed his version of the tale and regarded himself as the victim of my attacks. I attempted to tell everyone my side of the tale, but it went unheard. I was an outsider, saddled with an unfair reputation that stuck to me like a shadow. No matter where I went, the classroom, the cafeteria, or the halls, the eyes that met me were filled with contempt and suspicion. I became a loner. I would keep my head down, attend all of my lessons, eat lunch alone in the cafeteria, and remain straight. Return home. I didn't have any friends, and it seemed like no one wanted me there. Throughout this, my parents never phoned to check on me. My grandma would continuously tell me that this was not my fault and that everything will ultimately be okay. I finished from high school with outstanding marks and was looking forward to attending college, where I hoped to have a better life. Only after I moved away to college did I realize what independence felt like for the first time. Nobody was looking over my shoulder, comparing my grades, or competing with me. I met folks and made friendships with like-minded people. Despite the mental and physical wounds left by my family and classmates over the years, I focused on putting it all behind me and making the most of my college experience. During this period, I realized I had an aptitude for content writing. I'd always wanted to be a writer, but I wasn't convinced it would be a long-term career. As a result, I chose not to pursue my goal. However, it is possible to make extra money. I chose to begin writing as a freelancer. I joined up for many freelancing websites, which helped me get tasks from well-known companies. This is how I gradually began developing a portfolio of my work during college. I keep this side hustle going without asking my parents for anything. When I finished from college, instead of taking a corporate job, I discovered I could work full-time as a content writer. I was doing well since I had several clients and long-term professional ties with them, which allowed them to include me in a variety of their initiatives. Having a respectable freelance business not only gave me financial independence, but it also enabled me to explore the world as a digital nomad. Traveling helped me recover from my past, even if it was not easy. I saved as much money as I could and took a gamble on myself. I've seen a lot of the globe over the years, but there's always so much more to see. My grandma was the only person I considered family during all of this, and I cherished her. She was devastated when I moved out, but she saw that I needed to be independent on my own. Despite my demanding schedule, I made it a point to be there for her whenever possible. On weekends, I would pay Mom a visit, frequently eating meals or simply sitting on the porch, absorbed in chats about anything from childhood memories to current events. On the weekends, I would spend full afternoons assisting her with domestic tasks or joining her to the nearby park for a leisurely walk. I recently completed one of the most important assignments of my career. I can't reveal the brand, but I was really fortunate to write blogs and product descriptions for them. After the job was completed, I requested that the team I worked with post me positive evaluations on my websites, which they gladly did. So I grabbed photos of a few of their reviews and posted them on Instagram. As I understood, working with this company was a big thing. As predicted, several other content writers contacted me to congratulate me on my professional achievement, and some even republished my tale to spread the word. This is how I began receiving messages from strangers who also wanted assistance with their websites. My relatives observed this as well, and several of them contacted me to express their congratulations. I was eventually contacted by my college's principal. He had contacted me after seeing how well I was doing and invited me to come to campus for a lecture to speak to students about starting a career as a content writer. I was apprehensive since I'm not very good at public speaking, but I decided to take a chance and consented when I found myself standing in front of expectant faces. I quote sharing my experiences and insights. I felt as if my life had come full circle. In my speech, I discussed my challenges and how hard I fought to support myself. Despite the difficult days, it was a tremendously rewarding experience to empower others and contribute to the growth of the writing community. As individuals reasoned with my video, they went popular in Facebook groups. It was fantastic to be finally recognized for my efforts. Last week, I was asked to talk on a local news program. It was a presentation about the benefits of content creation, and they asked me to share my experiences and ideas with their audience. I was frightened, yet delighted about the prospect. During the event, I discussed my experiences, the value of customer feedback, and how a simple gratitude message may lead to fantastic possibilities. The potential to reach a larger audience and encourage more professionals in the area was both humbling and exciting. When it eventually happened, and I published some of these videos on Instagram since I was so happy of getting accepted to a TV program, my family and cousins began to notice how well I was doing in my work. You see, since my parents never mentioned me to anyone, they had no idea I was working with major businesses and being asked to TV shows. This is how word swiftly went among my family. I suppose this TV interview must have finally reached my folks. It's also due of this. A few days later, I was working on another job and set my phone to quiet when I finished. I opened my phone and was surprised to find 6 missed calls from my mother. I was astonished to see her name on my phone because it had been a long time since she had phoned me. After so many years of stillness, I couldn't understand why she was phoning me. I hesitated to call her back, and she answered right away. I asked her if everything was good, and my mother began to congratulate me. My father, who was presumably seated directly next to my mother, also joined in on the chat. He began to probe about my life and well-being, and I responded without much thinking. It didn't strike me as weird until they asked how much I made. These days, I told them it was none of their concern, and my father responded that we were family. Therefore, I shouldn't be bashful about sharing them my salary. I said that I was doing well financially. Hearing this, my mother proceeded to describe how difficult their life was these days, and my brow wrinkled with skepticism. This is basically how our talk went. We have retired now. We've been wanting to remodel the house for a time now. It's not in great shape, but we don't have any funds left. Okay, your achievement has given us hope. We saw your TV interview today and thought you might be able to assist us out by paying for the improvements. After all, we're a family. Please do not hesitate to share some of your revenue with us. We could really need your help. Are you fooling with me? Why are you asking for money when you haven't even spoken to me in years? I am not sure why you decided to contact me, and I appreciate your congrats. I am not going to aid you in any manner." Hearing this, my mother began telling me that I was being a bitch and that I needed to support them as a family. My father also stated that as my parents, they deserved to be looked after and that this was the least we could do. I was so irritated by this that I wanted to tell them off. I immediately had the thought that instead of battling with them, I could give them a lesson for life, believing that they could mooch off of me after mistreating me all those years before. I informed my parents that I was willing to help them only if they agreed to my terms. My father was interested and asked me what it was. Without hesitation, I stated my desire. If they wanted my assistance, they had to openly declare in front of our family and friends that my brother was the mastermind behind the false stories that had harmed my image. I wanted them to embarrass my brother in front of everyone, just like they had humiliated me by accepting his lies and manipulations. I wanted them to accept responsibility for their acts and recognize the anguish they had caused. Here, in my untenable situation, my father began to doubt the necessity of such an admission. My mother informed me that this was all unneeded and that we could have a private talk without engaging others. But I stood my ground. This was a non-negotiable requirement for any further assistance they requested from me. As the tension rose, my father raised his voice, establishing his authority as my father, and began to underline that it was my responsibility to assist my family in need. My mother, in a last-ditch attempt, persuaded me to do the right thing and assist them, emphasizing the years they had spent raising me. I couldn't help but see irony in this unexpected appeal. I reminded them of the past, that they had kicked me out, and that my grandmother, not them, had reared me. They became increasingly irritated, but I informed them firmly that if they wanted to contact me and request my financial aid in the future, the truth had to be publicly acknowledged, and my brother had to face the consequences of his conduct. Since this talk, my parents have been calling me non-stop, but I am ignoring them. I am beginning to regret ever phoning them back that day. I am interested in determining whether I would truly be a jackass if I did not provide any assistance to my parents. It's been a crazy week since I last shared my experience, and the outpouring of love and encouragement from everyone has been astounding. It "ass encouraging to know that I'm not alone during this moment. I'm happy everyone believes that I shouldn't talk to my parents or even contemplate aiding them after what they've done to me. I offered them such a condition since I knew they would be unable to complete it. I know they loved my brother too much, even if they could have discovered by now that it was all a lie. I know he will never have to go through what they did to me. Today, my brother sent me a nasty text message after my parents tried to reach me again, and I refused to answer the phone. Here's what he wrote. "Hey sis, it's been a long time since I've seen you, and I can tell you that every day without you has been wonderful. I heard Mom and Dad contacted you, and you suggested a wild alternate time. They'll never go through with it. Do you know that? They plainly didn't love you, and they will never damage me. I admit to lying about you 15 years ago, but it's been a long time since then. So quit being so selfish and attempt to move on from your past. You were never married and had no children. So why don't you assist them out by paying for their home repairs and renovations? Do the right thing and become a better daughter." Seeing the message felt like a stab in the chest. The boldness to ignore the difficulties I had encountered and the boundaries I had established. His lack of empathy was evident, and his effort to guilt-trip me by highlighting my single and childless position added an extra degree of insensitivity. His suggestion that I put their needs over my own was not only disrespectful, but also demonstrated how little he thought of me. Fueled by dissatisfaction and a strong desire for justice, I decided it was time to take matters into my own hands and expose the truth that had been buried for far too long. I sat down to compose an email to my parents and close relatives, explaining the sad events of my life and the unfair treatment I had received while growing up in my family's home. In the email, I detail the rigid and restrictive atmosphere I lived in with my parents, as well as how they treated me in comparison to my twin brother. The email also discussed the harmful and utterly false story my brother had circulated about me at school, which had resulted in serious consequences and harmed my reputation. I wrote about how my parents would have booted me out if it wasn't for my grandmother. I may have been dead on the streets by now. Toward the conclusion, I requested that everyone read a note my brother had sent me. I've enclosed a screenshot in which he acknowledged to lying about me. It was a simple confession, and I hoped it would reveal the lies that had lasted for too long. I wrote the email barely an hour ago, and I know what will happen when my parents and brother see it. Next, I'll let you know how my family reacts to my email. It's been a month since my previous revision, and a lot has occurred since then. As you may guess, my family erupted when they received the email. My parents have faced criticism from relatives who were previously unaware of the depth of their partiality and emotional abuse. Many family members contacted me saying they had no idea what was going on and apologized for not being there for me. My brother sent me an endless stream of text messages that became increasingly hostile and aggressive. So I contacted a lawyer who issued them a cease and desist notice. It basically told them not to approach me again because if they did, they would face serious legal penalties. I suppose this scared them since they stopped contacting me. My grandma feels I did the right thing by telling everyone what occurred and fully supports me. She quotes the one person who matters to me. Therefore, I'm grateful she has my back. It has been 2 months since my previous edit. I'm pleased to inform that my life is now going nicely. Professionally, my article writing business has thrived. The requests to speak at seminars and podcasts continue to come in, cementing my status as a renowned expert in my field. I am as close to my granny as ever. I just took a 1-week sabbatical from work to spend quality time with her. She is now into gardening and has taught me a lot about the many flowers and herbs in her yard. My best and most cherished memories are of spending time with her. Whether we were sharing meals, having profound talks, or simply enjoying one another's company. My family has not contacted me since the letter they received from my lawyer, so I'm glad they're keeping away from me. Personally, I've begun attending to therapy in the hopes of mending myself. For the time being, I believe this is the final patch.